This program is part of the Infinite Potato Alliance. Visit us at infinitepotato.com.
I'm Shane Thomas, and this is Analysing Doctor Who. I'm joined by Emma Foster and Ken Deep, and we are here to analyse the latest episode, 73 Yards. And if you have any thoughts on what you'll be hearing from us, or anything else Doctor Who based, you can email us at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com. So Emma, if we just start with the episode rating out of 10 for this.
I'm going to give it a 9.
Okay, Ken, your rating?
I'm going to give it an 8.
I'm also giving it an 8. Ken, what from this did you like the most?
I liked that it was dark and mysterious. I think that was probably, for me, we had it back to back with Boom, 2 slightly darker episodes. The show came to Disney Plus with a lot of positive, easygoing, very accessible kind of episodes with a little bit of silliness to start, and then it went with a over-the-top villain for the second episode, and now it's kind of settled into what we might think of as a little more, traditional style Doctor Who storytelling.
Okay, Emma, same question.
I like that it was an episode that didn't have a lot of easy answers. It's got a lot to think about in it, which is, like Ken says, we've had 3 episodes which are maybe not standard fare, but are, what you'd expect from this show. And then you kind of get out of left field a very dark and with no really any straight answers. And I think that's really refreshing for long-term fans. And I think a demonstration of kind of what this format can do for people who maybe aren't as familiar with Doctor Who as other people.
Yeah, I'll actually get to what I really like the most actually at the end, but I'll use this section to talk and highlight Dylan Holmes-Williams. He's the director of this episode, and I thought this was a very skillfully directed episode. When they're in the pub, at the tense moments in the pub, and he's using those Dutch angles, so like the angles where the camera's just tilted to the side and it's shooting from below, close on the faces, and then the use of distance with I don't know what we're calling her, the 73 yards woman, the old woman, older Ruby. The way they used, in terms of the depth perspective, to film her. There's a really nice bit early on when Ruby first sees her, and she says okay, I'll come over to you, and she starts to run towards her, and as she runs towards the camera pulls back.
Yeah, he chooses a lot of angles and shots that are meant to really make the audience feel sort of unsettled, and it was really well done.
It goes back to what you both were saying about the feeling of ambiguity and the feeling of being dark and slightly uneasy. A lot of that, I think, is where they put the camera and what they're shooting and how they're shooting it. It reminded me a little bit, this camera work, in a weird way of and you probably, I don't know if you ever got the show, Ken, but Emma, you'd have seen Spaced, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of Edgar Wright's work.
Yeah, because that was very much zeitgeist then.
And it was tiny budget, one camera sitcom. You've got Edgar Wright trying his best to make this look like a Hollywood film. If you haven't seen Spaced, but you've seen Edgar Wright's films, you already see Edgar Wright's sensibilities and his ambitions for what he wants his stuff to look like. And it reminded me, this guy, Dylan Holmes-Williams, I feel he's going to direct big stuff in 5 to 10 years. You can see the sensibility with him already. And another reason why I think that, and another theme I'll come back to, but Dylan Holmes-Williams is only 31 years old. So he was 29 or 30 when he filmed this. So he might not have even been 30 when he did this work.
Wow.
Which, yes, is impressive and also depressing for the likes of us. I mean, there was that one bit, I don't know, again, if you've seen it, Ken, you might have seen it, Emma, the last thing they had to film, it was the scene between Kate Lethbridge-Stewart and Ruby.
We were filming the final shot of the day. We were losing light. We had no time. It was incredibly stressful. We had to get this wide shot of the cafe where they were seated. And suddenly I look up and I see these 2 guys standing in the shop across the road. And I think that's really bizarre. They're so massively in the shot. So kind of naively, I just headed over there to talk to these 2 men. I didn't know who they were. And I just said, guys, you're right in the back of our shot, would you mind please moving? And they were like, no. And I was like, okay, cool, thanks.
Turns out they were press photographers hoping to get some shots of Millie and Gemma. Bit of a standoff ensued, but who would snap first? The snappers or the crew?
I thought, you know what, I might as well try one more time. We had about 5 minutes left at this point, and they were literally ruining the kind of very important shot. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try again. And I went back, and this time I can't even remember what I said, but I was, you know, in that state which directors are often in, of just being so intensely stressed. I think I just sort of begged and almost got down on my knees and said, please. I kind of, you know, humiliated myself, but said, you know, we're really at our wits' end here. We've got one more shot to get. We've got 5 minutes of light. Would you please mind moving out of the shot? Which for some reason they did. So it was great. I kind of couldn't believe it, but they eventually agreed to move. In the end, we did manage to just about get the shot, so there was a happy ending.
Yeah, I would have pulled the fire alarm on him.
Like, this is like reason 1000 why I could never direct an episode of Doctor Who, because once I asked nicely and they say no, then I'd be like, okay, just 1 second. I would have gone back to the set, I'd have got one of the cameras, I'd have come back and I'd have beaten the shit out of them both with it.
I was just happy they weren't fans.
I wasn't going to go that violent, but there's definitely some alternate ways we could make someone's life miserable.
And then they take the photos. I've asked them, we're the ones that are bad guys, and then that's what's in the media. Okay, so if you move, Emma, to what from this we like the least?
Okay, so 2 things. I think the last 10 minutes, although I didn't hate it, which I think from a lot of discourse I saw online, people really kind of disconnected in the last 10 minutes. I think the last 10 minutes is a little bit weaker. Not I didn't like it. I just think it's not as strong as the preceding 30. Also, it's good to know as a 40-year-old woman, I can simply take off my glasses and de-age 15 years. Because Amol Rajan getting icing sugar put in his hair, and we say, right, okay, it's down to 2046. Lads, we've had better aging makeup on this show before when we had no budget. Please, Millie Gibson, drop your skincare routine because as a 40-year-old, the aging makeup was a little bit, clearly she's just wearing a wig and things like that. I mean, that sort of took me out of it a touch. So, but when I'm down to like complaining about the makeup, you know that it was a good episode because I'm nitpicking.
Okay, Ken, if I come to you on that.
I have to agree that the ending was a bit rushed. There's this slow, creepy setup to what is going on, and I thought this might be a bit of a bottle episode where the whole thing took place in that pub. But then all of a sudden the scope opens up and, you know, they're on the football pitch and all this kind of stuff. But we never really develop the menace that this politician's supposed to be. We kind of, quite honestly, he's not the focus. The whole focus is going to be on Ruby, of course, but I don't think that they spent the time to develop how much of a threat that this villain's going to be. And that's probably why my rating is an 8 instead of a 9 or a 10. I really enjoyed the episode. It is a Dr. Light episode. It's, again, another thing, how people pick and choose what they love and don't love. Where was the Doctor in this? Like, we've never had a Dr. Light episode. Blink is one of the most famous episodes of all time, and it's a Dr. Light episode. I do think that Shudi's brief appearance is brilliant.
And this was sometimes get quite obtuse with the whole, where was the Doctor, where was the Doctor? We know the answer to that question. You know where he was? He was on the set of Sex Education.
Yes.
In a way, that complaint, it's an unserious complaint because this wasn't a choice. This is them, and this is something, in some ways, is anything more Doctor Who than this, of taking something that's disadvantaged and actually using it as an opportunity to do something different and creative.
The first time there was ever a Dr. Light episode, I think, was the Keys of Marinus.
Yeah,
and that was
the Partners of Holiday.
Yeah. So this is not something new. The one curious choice I will say is that, and this is, again, this is the kind of stuff that is annoying a certain segment of the fans. This is very much from the mindset of Disney Plus. We've got this brand new series. We're trying to hook people in. And 4 episodes in, our main star is sidelined. I get why some people might think that is a concern. However, Millie Gibson is more than capable of holding the show together, and there are 2 stars of the series. It would be no different in Star Trek if Mr. Spock had an episode 4 episodes in. People would still be like, fine, where's Captain Kirk? They don't care. It's not that important. She was fantastic, and it creates the mystery. All of that stuff is well written. It's not like they just ditched the lead character.
I mean, with the use of Roger at Gwilliam, I don't disagree with your point, but I feel confident. I don't know 100%, but I feel confident we will see this guy again. And this is a setup to him. So when we see him again, it'll be like, we remember him, we remember how dangerous or how much we've been warned about him. There won't need to be any introduction or exposition. It's like, oh, that, you know, when a returning villain comes back, it's like, oh, that one again.
Russell's been angling us towards not everything that we see is the correct timeline. I'm just spitballing here, but for all we know, in the real timeline, he's actually a good guy. In this timeline, he's taken the wrong path or whatever. So, and I hope you're right, because then I thought the character was interesting. Like I said, I just felt it was underdeveloped.
I'll say a lot of the fandom that I've seen, a lot of people are linking him to the sort of long, not abandoned, but long mysterious Minister of War, which gets mentioned in Before the Flood, the Capaldi episode. So I think that he's definitely not a good guy, because before the events of the episode begin, the Doctor mentions him as our most dangerous Prime Minister, which in a world which Harold Saxon has existed is quite the claim. So, yeah, I think that you're right. I think he's definitely coming back. And I think that Russell has also said that we shouldn't expect everything to be kind of neatly resolved in this series, because we've got a guaranteed series 2. So yeah. I think that we should probably take the long view with it. Also, I'm not ruling out, we're sort of halfway through the series, so I'm not ruling out that something's going to come up in like the last 2 episodes, for example, is going to recontextualise what we've seen. So I think we might be done with Roderick William for this series, but I would expect to see him in series 2.
Well, Emma, let me ask you, do you think, knowing that the Doctor lies, and we knew that Moffat lies, and we also know that Russell lies, and Russell just said, well, we're giving the Master a rest.
I mean, you always have that idea of, is such and such a person the Master? I mean, I think I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't rule out anything with Russell currently. I never rule out that such and such a character is a Master. I would be quite disappointed if they go with that, because I'm going to bring up something. I mean, I'll probably bring it up later on, that sort of a criticism a little bit of this series if I can later on. I think we'll come to it. But I feel like that would just be a bit of a retread of stuff that he's done before. I mean, because he was, again, the showrunner during the Harold Saxon arc. Sort of going down that road again, I feel a bit like, okay. But I would never rule it out. But I would hope they give him a rest.
But he does have a track record of sticking with successful formulas.
Oh, yeah, so of course,
there's the first episode, it's companion focused, so the audience sees the show through their eyes. The second one takes the companion off world. Then we go to historical. Like there's certain trends that this showrunner has done and repeated over and over and over again. And why wouldn't you change it? It's been successful for him,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why AC/DC have been making the same album for 50 years. It works. People buy it. So why would you change it? But
you mean they're not recording a power ballad?
Oh, no. I'll bring it up now because we're talking about it. But I feel like now we're halfway through. It sort of felt a bit like he's been playing the hits a little bit. So we have had things that have been reminiscent of his previous run through the show. And with the bits of Stephen Moffat he really sort of plucked out and put in. One thing that people have been bringing up is that Ruby's storyline seems quite reminiscent of the early Clara storyline, the Impossible Girl storyline. And he seems to have taken the bit where she has various incarnations through time and put that on Susan Twist. Also in Susan Twist, we've taken the thing from season 4 of Sherlock with Eurus Holmes popping up lots of times in different disguises. So, yeah, it feels like he's sort of playing a little bit of his Russell and Stephen's greatest hits at the moment. But, again, that's a nitpicky whinge from someone who's been watching it over and over again for a long time.
Yeah, a point about the Roger Williams storyline. I think it's only 17 minutes. So there was never going to be as much depth for a potential extinction level event villain as you'd used to see. That's why I just feel like an introduction. I think it was that 17 minutes of screen time and that storyline.
And I'm not holding it against the story. I just deducted those points only because I think if it turns out he doesn't return, it would have been more fulfilling to see it fleshed out.
I was just thinking, actually, as you guys were talking, that would it have been nice if we'd had hints of him in other episodes? But how can you? Because obviously if he becomes Prime Minister in 2046, 20 years prior to that, he's going to be at most, like 10 in 2024. So they can't like have him on the news or anything like that. So it's difficult to like do like a little meme kind of sprinkling him in or have him on the front of a newspaper or something like that so that we connect it to this episode. So it's kind of difficult to kind of make it all marry up. People have come up with theories as to how this episode works, its own internal logic and kind of what's happening here. In some of those theories, his appearance where he is makes more sense and in others less, which is what, in fact, is quite nice about this episode.
Yeah, in terms of what I like the least, and quick disclaimer, hopefully we won't talk about it for too long, but this is a quick disclaimer for conversations about sexual violence. So in the final third or so of the episode, the Marty Bridges character, I don't think it's subtle, I don't think it's meant to be. It's quite clear that Marty is a survivor of sexual violence committed by Roger. She's being abused by Roger, and Ruby knew and chose to not try and do anything. Now, her reasons are explained, and they're reasons I understand, but the storyline or that subplot is totally unnecessary because it doesn't help the episode. It's not something that adds anything to the episode. We don't need it because, well, I thought that Roger was all right, but now I know that he's a predator. Now I don't like him. It's like we already hated him. We already knew this guy was vermin. We didn't need that to be put in to dislike this person that's an antagonist. It's actually totally incidental to the story. Because one of the things you said, like, yeah, Roger's not the focus of the story. You take that out, that subplot out, even take the Marty character out, and what are we losing? Everything can remain the same. Everything can remain as impactful. It's almost kind of a, did you just throw that in for shock value? Because the idea of a politician like that, being like that, is obviously not a stretch. That's not even a hypothetical. That really does happen. But just because that really does happen and it's believable doesn't then mean, well, it has to go on the episode. Not if it doesn't align or benefit the story that you're telling. And this doesn't do any of that. This 15 minutes or so does feel like this was potentially on an earlier draft of one of Russell's Years and Years scripts. This is the only thing from the episode I actively didn't like. And people can feel different about this, and that's fine. I don't like using sexual violence in stories for shock. One of the worst things that Game of Thrones did. I'm not saying you can't ever use it in a story, but it has to be a really specific reason.
And you would hope you would address it properly.
It's thrown in and then we don't really think about it. And even though we're led to believe, obviously, this timeline now has stopped, doesn't exist. In this timeline, okay, so you stop Roger becoming Prime Minister, which I guess saves the world. But in that time, that character Marty's got to live with that trauma for the rest of her life. It feels a little bit, I'm sure not intentionally, but a little bit exploitative to use something that extreme in that way.
Yeah, I was uncomfortable with it at the time. Like you, Shane, I found it like, okay, I understand he's a piece of shit. You don't have to... Yeah, I get it. When you sort of listen to the Unleashed about when Russ was talking about this, I think it's definitely thinking of the Andrew Tates and the associated young sort of 30-ish right-wing grifter, traditional male, alpha male kind of
the manosphere
guys. Yeah, the manosphere people when he was writing Ad Roger at Graham. But also, again, talking about playing the hits, he obviously was thinking of Lucy Saxon, the Masters Trophy wife, who, again, if you listen to the commentary on that, where sort of once the Masters taken over the world and you see Lucy and she's got a black eye, Russell was talking about, I wish that I'd made it more obvious that the Master was roughing her up. But it's like, I get the Master's a piece of shit. He decimated the world, mate. I watched the Zoclophane decimate the world. You don't also have to have that he's slapping Lucy about and bringing domestic violence and stuff into it. So it's sort of that again, but it's like he's gone back and gone, okay, I wanted to do that before and now I'm doing it here. So yeah, I found it uncomfortable at best and kind of gross at worst.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even saying that it doesn't even make that storyline okay, because I agree. But even with that, with Lucy and Harold Saxon the Master, you could even say that, well, that explains why Lucy kills him, because Lucy's the one that kills him. But there's nothing like that here. And partly because it's only, again, 15 minutes. You can't properly give something like that what it needs in 15 minutes.
Shane, it seems like in watching it, I thought that there might have been a setup that she was going to be the one that sacrificed because of that trauma. Ruby is our hero in this story, but part of me with this abusive relationship, I thought that perhaps that's why this was being set up. But like you said, it went a little unfulfilled, and it just seemed a little bit out of place for what they were trying to do. Like you said, they were hitting the nail a little too hard.
Yeah, you almost make that the character rather than a politician, if that's the thing you want to address. I don't mind even that being addressed in Doctor Who, but not as a kind of a sidebar on a sidebar. So one of the big, this may take up most of the podcast to be honest, but one of the big things around this episode is the conversation that's incited about what the episode means. I'm not sure if I get it. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Emma, if I come to you just about that whole maelstrom of conversation.
This is going to sound odd. It was actually kind of refreshing, especially in the wake of the past 3 episodes. Boom, not so much. It was actually nice to go on to, look at Doctor Who Twitter, and there were people having nice conversations about this episode and saying, this is what I think, and people saying, this is what I think, I disagree with you here, I disagree with you there, and people saying, oh, that's an interesting idea. The online discourse was actually so much more pleasant and interesting and insightful, and some genuinely interesting and insightful thoughts I saw, rather than people just banging on about woke things and the usual kind of avalanche and nonsensical discourse that comes out. Mostly what I saw was actually very interesting discussions, and I was like, this is actually so nice. I remember this. This is like old Twitter. In terms of what does it mean, search me, Squire, I don't bloody know. But it's up to you, and that's what's nice. You can watch this, and whatever interpretation you come up with is equally valid, I think. People saying it's all come from Ruby, it's all a product of what she thinks, is that no, the fairy circle means nothing. Russell explicitly has said in one of the YouTube videos behind the scenes, because of the Doctor's stepping on the fairy circle, it's basically the purgatory recompense of disrespecting. So when old Ruby basically disrupts it, it's a timeline that's gone round once and the paradox is done, essentially. And again, there's people online saying, what a load of old, what a load of old fanny. It means nothing, it's very hollow. But if that's what you think, that's what you think. It's quite refreshing. Again, there's lots of media, I think, in the sort of the newish mode of horror movies. I'm thinking of things like It Follows, The Witch, Hereditary, Midsummer, a lot of these ones.
Yeah, someone mentioned, I haven't seen a lot of these films, to be honest, but someone said The Babadook as well.
The Babadook, a lot of these ones where it's quite ambiguous and there may be answers inside of the internal narratives of these things if you watch it over and over again, if you pause, you look at documents, if you listen to the commentary, if you go online and read forums, or, you can take it at face value, or you can watch it and think that was a load of old doo-doo, it wasn't for me, and all these interpretations are completely invalid. I'm thinking, again, mostly of, let's say, The Witch. Okay, you guys seen The Witch, the Vivitch, the one with Anna Taylor-Joy in it?
I haven't. That Robert Eggers film, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I've missed that one. I've heard it's pretty good.
But it is very good. But basically, you can take that film entirely at face value, and its events it entirely in face value. That what happens in it, what the narrative says is what's happening. But then a few years ago, someone said, hey, the entire what happens in that film could have been the result of all these people suffering from ergot poisoning because they eat shitty food at the beginning, it's shown, and they're basically, unable to deal with the outcome of that. And what happens is as a result of them all mass hallucinations. And the doctor went, yeah, that's an absolutely valid interpretation of what you're seeing. So it's entirely up to you. And I think that's great.
Same question to you, Ken.
Well, you're going to hate my answer because my answer is I agree with Emma 100%.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
I don't hate it if it's what you think.
And actually, I love metaphor and allegory in storytelling, especially in science fiction. I think that's the thing that's always drawn me to science fiction and fantasy, are those metaphors and the idea of thinking. The reason this episode has frustrated so many people is because thinking is difficult and not everybody does it. And as Emma said, it was really refreshing to actually hear online commentary and discourse between actual Doctor Who fans who tuned into the episode. All of that was refreshing. I don't have an interpretation of it. And I think mostly because it's one of these episodes I think is going to require me to watch and just kind of come to it on my own and sort of sort it out. What I do love is the idea that we have an episode like this, because this is the kind of stuff that new audience that we're going to get from the exposure on Disney Plus are going to feel challenged by, especially the younger ones.
I mean, one thing that is quite clear that I can't remember the last time an episode has incited so much conversation, and not about all the stuff as you say, Emma, not about the stuff around the show, but the actual content of the episode, the content of the 45 minutes. I haven't been more eager to talk about an episode since, like, Thin Ice, maybe. The episode ended. I wanted to record this conversation immediately, and I also wish we could have recorded it in maybe about 2 weeks' time, because I feel I would have thought more about it.
So obviously I watched this at breakfast on Saturday morning. We watched it and me and Chuck talked about it, and we watched The Unleashed. I had to go to the shops, so I went to the shops, and the shop I went to go to was like a 15-minute walk, and the whole walk there and the whole walk by the time I was shopping and the whole walk home, I was thinking about this episode, and I don't know the last time I did that. And I think that it's kind of almost unique. I'm trying to think of other episodes, because we've had other episodes where obviously you can take lots of interpretations. I'm thinking mostly of Heaven Sent, because you can again take Heaven Sent at face value. I think I remember at the time when I did a podcast about it, I was like, this is really like, you can take this as a metaphor for depression, but there's an explanation as to why Heaven Sent happens. He's in the confessional. Other episodes I'm thinking of things like Amy's Choice. I mean, it's a result of the Dream Master or the Dream Lord. There's, I mean, all these other episodes that are sort of like 73 yards have an internal explanation. Unless you take Russell's thing of like, he broke the fairy circle and this is what happens. There's literally no internal explanation given to you at all about why this happens. It is entirely up to you. And I can't think of another episode that is like that. The one thing I will say about potential explanations is that we haven't seen the full series yet. Yeah, I'm not ruling out that saying we'll recontextualize what we've seen. Yeah, I personally think it's a standalone, unless the villain comes back, which I don't think will explain why this happened. I think we'll just see a reappearance of our villain. But there is a chance that if the timelines, and as you were saying, we're kind of equating this maybe a bit to Clara's storyline. If the timelines are out of whack, or this entire season is not what it appears to be, then we may get an overall explanation once everything is revealed. So from that standpoint, we are best served by just kind of reserving a little bit of judgment. But I also want to point out this and Boom, two things that I loved about the stories, was the fact that the universe wasn't in jeopardy. For these two episodes, Boom, it was the Doctor. Oh gosh, the Doctor, is in mortal danger. And in this episode, it's Ruby and whatever it is that she's dealing with. The universe, the planet, the this, the that. We didn't have that need to make the scope larger than it needed to be. Because sometimes something is simple. In Moffat's case, the Doctor is in danger of dying. That's all we need to know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the potential world is in danger if like World War... who knows what world war it would be by this point, 2046. But that's not the focus. The focus isn't end of the world. The focus is Ruby's journey is what we're focusing on. The main takeaway I had was, and I sent this from my Twitter, at AnalysingDW. I sent a tweet that I felt that the old woman was, that whole thing was a metaphor for depression. And reasonable people can agree or disagree with that. What I will say is that I've never, ever sent a tweet that's had so much, I don't know what the correct, impressions, I guess?
Yeah, impressions, engagement.
Yeah, engagements. It didn't feel like anything massive I'd sent, but it's still kind of getting engagements now. 2 whole days since the episode, and people are still responding to it. And forget, like, the ego boost of, lots of people like my tweet. But, I mean, it's interesting that that's clearly struck a chord. It doesn't mean that my tweet struck a chord. I mean, that part of the episode clearly struck a chord, because what I viewed it as far as like depression or struggles with mental health, is that, as in the old woman, is there, but it's always just a bit too far away for you to have any impact on. As hard as you try, you can never properly get close to it. It scares everyone else away, and it's always with you. Ruby gets older, she even stops trying to get rid of it, and by the end she's almost embracing it. Every birthday she's raising a glass of wine, or I think it's like she's probably drinking a tea by the time she's 40. And when she makes the decision, she splits up with the latest boyfriend when she's 40, and starts to walk towards the Albion offices. And she turns around and looks at the things like, all right, come on, let's go. Like you would a pet. You realise, it's not going anywhere. So I'm almost happy to accept this as part of me.
I would maybe say, instead of saying embracing it, just saying resign to it.
No, that's probably actually a better way to put it, yeah. I mean, some people have also said it's a metaphor for death, as in just oncoming mortality. Again, not something we can ever outrun. There was another good analysis I thought about it, and so other people have made this, about it's Ruby's issues, understandable issues of abandonment, and it's made very explicit when she's old that everyone's left me, and it's her constant fear of abandonment, which is understandable why she'd have that. One of the best tweets I saw about this was a guy on the line from Chris Markham who said, how much you like 73 yards seems entirely dependent on how closely it aligns with your trauma. Which I think is a very good observation. And maybe that's why so many people have taken it so many different ways, and some people maybe have struggled with it. Like I don't think this is the majority of you at all. You can sometimes see something online and extrapolate that to be, this is what the fans are saying. It's not. But there have been some fans, and I don't like this of, oh, just tell me what it means, Russell. I don't want to have to think. If that's who you are, then this isn't the show for you. He can't help you, we can't help you. You should maybe watch something else.
I also saw that Jessie Gender, the YouTube commenter, has also got a video up. I haven't watched it yet, about they were sort of exploring this episode as like a trans allegory.
This episode just seems to be about that internalized anxiety that probably all of us have in some way, shape, or form, that there's something about us that everyone can see, and if they ever really focused on it or paid attention to it, that they would actually hate us, that they would reject us, that they would just push us all away if they just really looked hard at this thing that we think everyone knows about us or can see about us. It's just that little niggling anxiety. For me, like growing up, it was being trans. It's not something I feel about anymore, but as a trans kid growing up, not wanting anyone to know that, it's like, I think everyone knows this about me, but if they really focused, they would see it and they would just hate me and reject me for it.
People talking to the woman, they look back at Ruby like that, sort of finding out something so profoundly horrible or strange about her that they leave her.
Yeah, it repels them.
It repels them, yeah, exactly. So obviously, and then that fear around that's another interesting reading of the story. Some of the, I wouldn't say disappointment, but maybe some of the kind of like, what the hell was that, has come a little bit around how the episode was advertised. It's not anyone's fault as such. I mean, I definitely read it as, looking at the advertising, it was going to basically be It Follows meets Midnight in a pub. All those things about it being folk horror and all that sort of thing. So I think that obviously when the episode started and it was in the pub, I certainly thought that it was going to be all in there and it was going to be entirely focused on this village. And then obviously when Ruby just, packed up and went home and constantly going sort of, where is this episode going and all that sort of thing. But I think if you looked at this episode and you were like, oh, brilliant, it's going to be like this scary folk horror kind of story, and you basically constantly getting swerved by the episode, if you don't dig that kind of storytelling and you don't really like these kind of more metaphorical stories, I can definitely see that if you went into it very much expecting one thing and then you get in lots of different others, effectively Doctor Who's meets Black Mirror essentially, then I can see why it might end up with some people feeling a bit disappointed. But that is on them, not the episode, I feel.
I think the most powerful moment for me, which practically reduced me to tears, was when Ruby's stepmother rejects her. Although I'm blessed to still have both my parents with me, I work with foster children. I'm a special ed teacher, and I've seen rejection by parents firsthand, and I know the trauma it causes, I know the pain it causes, and in a lot of cases, the irreparable damage to a child. To see this wonderful character where I cried on Christmas because of the love that she displayed. To see it, even if this is some kind of alternate timeline or whatever, that moment was brutal.
It's well to do it to Ruby, who's like, especially if you compare it to, say, a Rose. So we talk about RTD1 and his second go of this, putting two companions up sort of against each other for comparison, where they're similar ages, Rose and Ruby. But where Rose, I think, especially when you first meet her, although she's, a young person, she's like 17 or something when you meet her initially. She's left school, but, she's already quite cynical about her life. She's got a boring boyfriend, still lives with her mum. She's got a job she doesn't like. When you first meet her, she's kind of like already getting ground down, quite cynical. Whereas with Ruby, who is got every right in the world to be like that, considering her life and what she's been through, is absolutely not like that at all. She's incredibly upbeat. She's incredibly hopeful. She's got this curiosity and kind of sadness in her from the events of this episode. She's got that dog in her as well, because she does not give up for 1 second. It's kind of interesting to compare and contrast these two characters, how Russell's kind of decided to approach these kind of two initial companions. I thought it was quite interesting as well for me personally, as as someone who's aged with the reboot show. When it came back, I was 22, I think I was, and now I'm 40. So how I feel about the companions really changed as well. Like, whereas with Rose, I was sort of quite relate to Rose in terms of like the kind of the cynicism and kind of bored of my hometown and my job and leaving school and being a bit disappointed, things like that. Whereas now, looking at Ruby, I feel quite maternal towards Ruby because I'm a whole grown-up person older than her. I could conceivably be her mum. So, yeah, that rejection from Carla, especially as, you know, because there's so much love in that house and it's to just switch like that is absolutely brutal. And how it made me feel just made me feel so like, oh, it was heartbreaking.
You know, it's interesting because great art speaks to us differently at different points in our points in our life. You're a mom now?
I am.
So, you know, your sensibilities are different now than they were when you first watched the show.
Yeah.
And maybe this episode wouldn't have had the same impact. That kind of rejection may not have had the same impact at a different point in your life. So it's just so interesting, and a credit to them for making something so incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. But it really kind of, when I was thinking about it last night, I was like, wow, it really kind of made me feel that way. And kind of, I was thinking about why. And I was like, oh, that's probably why. Because like I say, I've got quite kind of more sort of mumsy maternal feelings towards Ruby, which I wouldn't have had 20 years ago if I was watching it now.
Another interesting thing about like Ruby in terms of her characterization, that she also believes in people. Probably because she was lucky enough to be fostered, adopted by the right people and themselves. I mean, I forgot the line that she says when she says to Kate regarding the old woman is, they see her but they don't notice her, which is a very common thing, not just with people who are maybe struggling with depression, but just people in general. I think someone, Alex Wakefield on Twitter said that the spectrum of thoughts for this episode is, this is incredible to what the fuck was that, and we can agree with just about all of them. And as far as the fans were complaining, I did like another thing I saw online, which is like some certain Doctor Who fans every Saturday, that's the worst piece of television I've ever watched 3 times.
Yeah.
As far as the episode goes, there's a line where the conversation with Kate, Unit suspects this timeline is suspended along Ruby's event, which I think is just a line to kind of explain how does this affect things in the future? It might not. Well, yeah, we'll see. But I think that if we never see something like this again, and there is a line giving reason to that. This is a singular, unrelated timeline parallel to everything else. It's not interlinked with others. And I actually think the need sometimes to get it actually kind of misses the point a little bit. And Kate has a line about this in this conversation. Isn't this what we do? We see something inexplicable and we invent the rules to make it work. I think as well that Russell was doing his best with certain fans and being like, if you don't get it, it's fine. Because, I mean, I hadn't even thought about the point that Jesse made, Emma, about the trans allegory, but you explain it to me and I'm like, oh yeah, that makes some sense. I think it's part of what makes the episode so good is that you've written a work of fiction that so many different people from so many different perspectives and experiences and background can relate to and can look at that and be like, oh, that's me, or I know someone else like that in so many different ways. This episode I don't think is a puzzle box to be solved. This isn't Boom. And by the way, this isn't a shot of puzzle box episodes. They have their place as well. But this is not Boom. Boom was more of a puzzle box to be solved and a clear, this is what's going on, this is what's happening, here's what it means. 73 yards. It's not like that, and I think it is very beneficial, particularly for new fans, for them to find out just how broad and malleable Doctor Who can be, and I think no other show can do this. Doctor Who can be like stretched and folded and twisted and contorted to fit into so many different shapes, and it still remains itself. It still remains Doctor Who. Like, this is as much Doctor Who as dinosaurs in a spaceship. I don't think there's any other television show that can do this. Part of what makes it so good. We don't spend too much time on this, Ken, but one thing that did stand out, Russell described it as Welsh folk horror, is this episode felt very Welsh. Maybe the most Welsh episode of Doctor Who. I don't know how much you can relate or align with that, obviously, because you're thousands of miles away across an ocean.
I have visited Wales, Cardiff in particular, a few times, and I did enjoy that part. I'm sure it has more resonance with the Welsh and with Brits in general that perhaps goes over the head of non-Brits. However, the show is made in Cardiff, so go for it, peeps. Fly the dragon proud, you know?
Yes, right, Emma, did anything about that stand out to you when you watched it?
It seems almost a shame to have the very distinguished actor, Welsh actor, Dame Sian Phillips in this for not very long. I thought that was a little bit of a shame in regards to that. And it was interesting that the pub and the landlady were the pub and landlady from Countryside, the episode from Torchwood, which has very much the opposite effect. Maybe if you wanted to go to rural end of Wales. Yeah, I've been to Wales a few times, or city bit. I'm not Welsh. I'm one of the oppressors. So, I can't speak too much on that.
I really like when the show does this because Doctor Who is thought of as a British show or even a British institution. Russell T Davies having to turn this into a Welsh show. I think Doctor Who is as much, if not more, Welsh than British. And those two things are not always the same. There are certain people in Wales who want those two things to never be the same.
Well, do you remember, again, talking about Torchwood, famous line they had for Miracle Day?
That was your last chance.
Yeah? What are you going to do about it? If you're the best England's got to offer, then God help you.
I'm Welsh.
It plays with some nice tropes, really. I love the thing about a rural part of Wales. It's not backward. It has technology. It doesn't automatically subscribe to myths and old wives' tales. And David said this is partly a commentary on how England see the Welsh. Because, Wales is also a part that I guess to put this in American parlance, would be seen as part of the Rust Belt. It is othered.
Like if you ended up in the Appalachian Mountains or something, you're like, oh my God, where's the banjos?
Yeah, and it's obviously you walk in a pub and then everyone turns and looks at you.
The flat roof pub energy of that place is very, even though it's not. That's a bit of British law for you there, Ken. The idea of the very sketchy, usually pubs that are basically one story and have a flat asphalt roof. In British law are the very sketchy pubs that you should not go in under any circumstances unless you're actually dying and you need help.
The 6 or 8 locals don't really want you there. It's like you just walked into their living room.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you feel it was painted correctly where you have all of those sensibilities represented?
I definitely thought so. Even in as much as there's almost a shorthand, not vernacular, but all these people in the pub obviously have known each other for probably a while. They're probably there almost every day. In terms of how they interact, just if you go into a social setting and you're the new person and everyone else knows each other and everyone else has a way of interacting, it's like a different language even though you understand all the words they're saying. And Ruby cannot penetrate that bubble. And so all the jokes and all the quips and snarky comments are at her, or she feels they're directed at her. And also she's someone that probably has anxiety around this anyway, anxiety of abandonment, not belonging and that kind of thing. So this just turns it up really nicely.
There were some people online, I think it was mostly sort of young people actually, bless them, who were like, why are they being so rude? I was like, oh mate, you haven't lived. And they just decided to fuck with her because she's English and she's young. And they just took against her and that's what happened.
There was one moment in this episode where I got a touch of the android invasion from the classic series.
Yeah.
Where they're in the pub and everyone's looking at them. There's one moment here which goes to this whole messed up timeline theory. She walks in and she says, "Can I pay with my phone?" And they all look like they don't know what she's talking about. They make a joke of it, of course, in the story where we're laughing. Ha ha, of course you can. The sort of conspiracy theorist in me says, well, what if at that moment, whatever is controlling this said, oh, okay, this wasn't in our plan, so quick say yes, or whatever, or come up with another thing. In the way something like Android Invasion, they're walking into this pub and they're all really desperately trying to be normal,
Yeah. Another interesting interpretation, because in this whole series there's definitely this element of people seem to know that they're in a pretend story, if you see what I mean. One of the most interesting things, apart from Kate's whole scene, which has got lots of little tidbits which I think are going to be important later on, is Mrs. Flood in this, because she turns up and then she says, this has got nothing to do with me, and she leaves.
Having a nice time? Yeah, I'm just speaking to... You're standing in the street on the phone to your own mother? Yeah. Nothing to do with me.
She's talking to you, the audience. She's saying, this has nothing to do with me.
Yep.
I've got nothing to do with all this mess that's going on. I'm out. And I was like, that's so clever. I was like applauding the bloody screen.
On the rewatch, I thought that dialogue was actually it wasn't naturalistic at all. It was very curious, that dialogue.
Yeah, and she knows she's in pretend land and she knows what's going on. Because, there's that
another
whole thing.
fourth wall breaking, too.
It It's basically, and when we rewatched it, right at the very, very end of that story, when Ruby's saying about, I've been to Wales 3 times, and she's like, obviously the memory of what's happening is kind of actively leaving her, and the camera is sort of on her, and I was waiting for her to flick her eyes towards the screen and break the fourth wall and look at us about it, but she doesn't, and I thought, that's so interesting, because we watched it, and me and Chuck turned and looked at each other at the same time. Did you feel like she was about to break the fourth wall and didn't? And I was like, yeah, I did wonder that. I thought that was so interesting, because I was like, when it happened.
Earlier, we were talking about revisiting the greatest hits with Russell, and also that he's also revisiting a few of Moffat's greatest hits. One of Moffat's hits, his first series, was very much a fairy tale. The allegory throughout that, this sense of fairy tale, like, when I was a little girl, I had an imaginary friend. So going to this line of thinking that we've just been talking about, I'm curious if this is also a fairy tale motif or whatever. I'm going to be curious how they sew this all together.
I'm just more worried that they're going to like Bobby Ewing in the shower and it's going to be all a dream. I'm just so worried that it's going to be people are then going to read it as like, oh, well, this series doesn't exist and like write it off. And I was like, I hope that what's happened is actually happened. But bringing in that kind of that fairy story, supernatural folklore kind of feeling with it is going to be really tough. I have to put my money on anyone pulling it off. I would hope Russell can do it. But yeah, I hope that it doesn't leave any wiggle room in that respect.
Yeah, just to finish up on the Welshness before we go into additional observations, I did like they mentioned the history of Welsh castles. The line about Wales being steeped in blood. If you think of like a colour, like what colour would you associate with Wales? It's red. It's without even thinking, it's always red. Their teams, all their sports teams, all play in red. Red is Welsh. It's like if you ask me what colour would you associate with Italy, without even thinking about blue, Brazil, yellow or gold, and Wales, red. Always red.
And isn't the dragon blood red? Like,
yes.
Don't they describe it as blood red?
Yes, the dragon. Yeah, the dragon is red. Even like their main stadium, what's called the Principality Stadium in Cardiff now. I picture it, and I went there because I went there last year. In my head, I'm picturing a red stadium. Now, I don't think it is a red stadium.
No, but all the logos are red because they used to be, their national bank is all red logos. But it's funny though because Cardiff City are blue.
Yeah, and interesting about Cardiff is in that pub there's a football game in the background on TV. On a rewatch, I'm pretty sure that's the Cardiff City Stadium, which we then see later in the climax of the Ap Gwilliam storyline. And just final thing, Ruby making in the very first scene saying, I went to Mumbles once because of a boy. Mumbles, as some people already know, is Russell's hometown. Okay, Emma, just because I have quite a few myself, observations we haven't made yet about the episode.
If I go back and watch this, I was really paying special attention to the stuff we hear from Kate, because I think that basically everything she says is incredibly, I think, important for kind of the setup of the series, how we're going forward, especially with a view to the last 2 episodes. Yeah, and I'm always happy to see Gemma Redgrave. I think she's been great last couple of episodes that we've seen her. Okay,
Ken, anything else you want to add?
Well, it's always like Emma's reading my mind because I love.
I'm sure I do.
And I, too, am always happy to see Gemma Redgrave. And I'm hoping this is not the last we've seen of her.
Oh, no, definitely not. We understand that this unit will be involved in the finale.
And that's probably the key to the overall story arc, is the things that she said while she was in there. Overall observations on the episode, I enjoyed it greatly. I'm looking forward to watching it again. At the risk of just kind of rehashing everything I said, I love stuff that is challenging and interesting and makes me think. And this is one that will get enormous rewatch value.
Yeah, on Kate, someone made a good point online when they said, if you only just started watching this show since Russell's come back, then you probably don't have a very good impression of Kate Lethbridge-Stewart as a character at all. Someone made a very funny joke online that the most unrealistic thing about this week's episode is that the Prime Minister would check the weather forecast before doing a speech outside. Another funny observation online is these two really need to look where the fuck they're going when they're walking.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
These two, like, we had a butterfly, we had a landmine, now we had a fairy circle. One that I mentioned with our preview pod, I wondered how kind of culturally black Ruby's home would be, as in where Carla and Cherry live. And the kind of thing I was wondering kind of showed up this week. So we're not there for very long. But when Ruby does leave the TARDIS, goes back home, and I think Carla's maybe a cup of tea or whatever, she's not doing the washing up. And there's music playing in the background. And I couldn't make out the song. I have to get like Shazam out or something. But there's a roots reggae song playing in the background. And when Cherry and Carla are also basically the Doctor kind of left you. Kind of, you know, that's what a man does. And Cherry makes a point about his box of tricks and says there must be some kind of guzum. And guzum is a patois word. It kind of means, so beer, but it kind of means like witchcraft. And stuff like that is exactly the kind of thing I was hoping for and wondered whether they do. Those kind of very, very subtle, they're background stuff. Like even that line from Cherry, it sounds like an ADR line, to be honest. She's not even in shot. You can just hear her shouting from like her bedroom. So those little things in terms of, just vernacular music in among the everyday day-to-day lives that all of us live. I was very happy to see that, and that is exactly the kind of thing I thought they might do, because that's the kind of stuff Ruby would have grown up with. Michelle Greenidge, who plays Carla, when she gets scared away and then you see her in the taxi in slow motion go past Ruby, Michelle Greenidge, she gives like a really, really good like screw face, a proper like disdainful, that look of disgust. That's real good acting, because
I'll tell you what though, have you seen her in there's that the very strange comedy program called Mandy, which is
I haven't. I know it's on iPlayer. I know what's her name, Diane Morgan.
Yeah, Diane Morgan's show. It's like a 15-minute like comedy like thing they do.
Oh,
it's very surreal.
I was half out.
No, they're like 15-minute. They're 15-minute episodes. They're very quick, because she plays her best mate in it, and she's fucking hilarious in it. She's so good to the point where I was like, hang a minute, is that Lola from Mandy? And she was like, oh my god, it is. I mean, check it out. It's very weird but very good. But yeah, she's fabulous.
That look was good God.
I mean, how is Ruby still alive? You think that just struck her dead? That look.
Yeah. The unit spin-off was teased again in the Kate Lethbridge scene, just about, I don't know what, when the Doctor's not here, and it's like, there's a line like with great difficulty, but there's a line of, we do stuff, which that feels very much the unit spin-off. As Russell did in Years and Years, I really did like the fact that he put, if you look at the Albion offices, that there is not an insignificant, it's a minority, but not insignificant amount of black and brown people there, and I like the fact that he showed they're just as capable of being right-wing as anyone else. You need to look at our current government. But there does my head in online when I'm not against this, but a kind of a push to, we need more like women and people of colour in politics and institutions, and what they're saying is, because then you'll get more left-wing stuff, and it's like, that's not a guarantee of anything. If that's your motivation for doing it, then your strategy is all wrong. The idea that if you put people of colour in, and that all of a sudden you will therefore get more left-wing policies or even more anti-racist policies is absurd. He did this in Years and Years, and he did it here. If you look at the offices, you think of what McWilliams' politics must be, and I don't think it's a stretch to assume what they might be. But yes, there will be people in there who aren't white who are just like, well, if I'm on the winning side, and that's all I really care about. Ruby, at one point, is kind of talking to the TARDIS like she's talking to the Doctor, and I always like the idea that she's talking to both, because they both are sentient. When the old Ruby visits the TARDIS near the end, the camera just pans over the fairy circle again, and there's a message here that says "Love you, Josh," and Josh was the guy in the pub who old Ruby scares away, the one who left and didn't come back, and that obviously didn't feel like an accident. And we've kind of touched on this a bit anyway, but theme of Russell's companions, they all seem to have one episode where they're away from the Doctor and they get put through it big time. You have Rose in Parting of the Ways, Martha in Last of the Time Lords, Donna in Turn Left. Usually it's towards the end of their run. This is quite earlier in Ruby's run, and this is definitely Ruby's, where they're without the Doctor and they have to kind of do it on their own, and let's just say the slow path is quite an agonising one, and it almost feels like it changes them. Maybe that's why this timeline looks to be separate from all the others, because Ruby would just be totally different as a person. Some people complain that she doesn't even retain the memory, and it's like, if she did, you have a very different Ruby Sunday from the character they probably initially created. Someone said online that it's nice that Doctor Who will sometimes casually drop something like this episode, like it's just a standard episode of a TV show. This is one of my favourite episodes of television all year so far. With the TV that I watch, which I watch plenty, but Doctor Who kind of sits in its own little space where, whether it's kind of good or bad, I kind of watch it anyway. I kind of engage with it anyway. I probably think about it more than I do about any other TV that I watch, even when it's not good. So like good Doctor Who sometimes is different than good television. It's just a unique show in so many ways. But this episode is one of the best episodes of anything I've seen this year. We'll see what happens come award season next year. Probably here, I don't mean in the US. But it would be nice if this got some recognition come award season next year. And I know the reviews in America as well. New York Times, I think, gave us 5 stars. 4 or 5 stars. The reviews have been very, very positive. And how this ends, I think some people have said, let's see what this all means when we get to, Empire of Death. But personally, I am choosing, even if the end of this series is maybe a bit of a disappointment, that isn't going to personally affect how I feel about this and how it felt to watch this and the conversations it sparked and even this podcast episode. I can say, yeah, this series, maybe this whole series as a whole may be disappointed. This didn't. And whatever happens in episode 7 and 8, it's not ruining how I feel about episode 4. So, Ken, if we come to your episode MVP.
For me, it's Ruby. I know that seems like it's an obvious answer, but this was her showcase. It really was. And to your point about putting the companion through it in a Dr. Light episode, normally being later in the season, I think this was a bit of a risk to do it a little bit earlier. But I also think in Russell, I always trust. There's a reason why he may have selected this where he did in the running order, knowing a certain type of audience they're trying to attract. So it was a showcase vehicle, and it worked flawlessly.
MVP, Emma?
I can't say anyone other than Millie Gibson. I think you sort of have to keep reminding yourself. I mean, she was 18 when she filmed this, and she hadn't done a lot of other work. And this was very early doors in their shooting of the whole show. So to kind of be thrown straight into this and to just knock it out of the park. If you don't plausibly believe what Ruby's going through, then this whole thing just falls to dust. And you're with her from the jump right to the end. And I think that's a real tribute to just how good Millie Gibson was in this. So, yeah, she deserves all the flowers for this one.
I don't think in the whole... we've been doing this podcast for that long, maybe a couple of years or 2-3 years, but I don't think the whole time we've been doing this podcast has been an easier choice for MVP. This episode has, and I think rightly so, has been spoken of in conversation with episodes like Heaven Sent and Turn Left, even something like The Girl Who Waited. And all those episodes are basically rely on one actor and need an actor to pull out a really strong performance. And 73 Yards needed Millie Gibson to do the same. She wasn't just 18, as Emma says. This was her very first thing she filmed. This is day 1. Here you go. Deal with this. By the way, the guy, your more experienced co-lead, who's the lead of the show, he ain't here yet. This is on you. This is, hey, first game of the NFL season. Our star, our all-star quarterback, 5-time Super Bowl winner. Yeah, he ain't here. He's injured for the first game of the season. So you got to lead the offense. Here you go. Good luck.
On top of that, we don't know how much interaction she had with Shooty. So she's got to guess how she's going to play against the Doctor.
18-year-olds are not meant to be as good at anything as Millie Gibson is in this episode. Davis makes a point. The first scene they apparently filmed was the montage of when she's like 20, 30, 40 and she goes to the window and sees the old woman and raises a glass to her. And Davis, they saw the recording, saw the rushes, and immediately is like, yep, she's got it. We've got this right. And what he highlighted was her stillness and how rare that is in young actors. I mean, how rare it is in young people. And it's true, so many good actors aren't antic. They're still. They're calm. They're controlled in all their movements and everything they say and do. TV is a medium that can do convincing the characters changing over time. But over time, usually over a number of series, or even a series, not in one episode of 45 minutes. What impressed me so much was the subtle changes you see Millie Gibson do with her face and her voice and her body, and why the notion of the very limited aging makeup didn't actually bother me at all, because I could see the change in this character getting older through everything the actor was doing. When she's older, she barely smiles. The optimism of being young is gone, and the optimism of that character that we've seen, that Emma's already mentioned, what she's like, all of that is now gone. And it's bit at a time has been taken from her. She's abandoned. The Doctor's gone. Oh, my family's abandoned me and has taken legal action against me to keep me away from them. The one thing I have, and that's what the unit scene is so good and placed at a perfect time in the episode, because as an audience we're like, finally she has some help, and no she doesn't, and that's the time when she totally loses her temper and gives up hope.
Kate! No, Kate, you can't leave! Kate! Kate, please don't go, Kate! Kate, wait, Kate! Fine, too nice. Yeah, I said all right!
She had a movement coach apparently for when she plays 40, so actually how she holds her body different, she walks slightly different. There are such almost imperceptible changes in her acting, which convince, oh yeah, she's 25, yeah, she's 30, yeah, she's 40, yes, I'm buying all of it. Like, as Emma says, if you don't, there is no episode. The episode falls over immediately. In terms of what she does with her voice, the scene with Susan Twist, where Susan Twist is hiking, and it's like, have we met before? And I don't think so. And then she says to herself, and it was in such a wonderfully realistic way of, she says to herself, oh no, that was a different, and she just trails off. And it's done in a way that any real person would. The way she said it wasn't as if like this is a line I've learned from a script. It felt like this is a organic human reaction. And when Carla gets away from her in a taxi, the desperation in her voice communicates and signals emotion to us.
Mum, whatever she's saying, just don't... No, Mum! Mum, don't listen to her! Please don't do this to me, Mum! Mum, don't do this to me, Mum! Mum! Mum, please stop! Mum!
That's why we were crushed by it. That's why if you're on the verge of tears. That's why, because of all her work. I said after Church of Ruby Road that I liked her immediately. I now want to know just where the fuck RTD found her. Where did you find this wunderkind? She is an absolute marvel. We have found someone truly special. I thought, yeah, she's good. We might have found like a true superstar here.
I mean, this might be a Carey Mulligan situation. I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say if she goes and does big dramas after this, we're talking BAFTAs, we're talking Olivier's. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, because she's that talented.
And I'm worried about being a prisoner of the moment, because it's only been like, maybe 72 hours after since I've seen the episode. But I haven't changed my mind on this from the second the episode finished. I'm not saying that Ruby Sunday is the greatest companion ever, but I am going to say this is the greatest performance an actor has ever given as a companion. And maybe we'll ever see as an acting performance.
I mean, conceivably. I mean, I think that could this be like a Karen Gillan situation, in that maybe she catches on with the right role and then now she's in Hollywood. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say that she could go down that road. I wouldn't say any of the current companions are bad actors at all, but I would struggle to put anyone above her in terms of just raw talent.
What we've seen, this is legendary stuff. This is pantheon levels. And I've always said, and I love about Doctor 2, it doesn't cast stars, it makes them. And it may have just made its greatest ever. And I would say to everyone, enjoy this woman while we have her. We might be talking about an absolute all-timer. She gave an acting performance for the ages. I don't know if I've ever seen or will ever see a better one in this show. She may have stolen the series.
I'm just sort of thinking in terms of like even guest appearances. I mean, in terms of things like sheer taking an extremely difficult concept and just knocking out the park. The only one I could sort of put up with her maybe saying to Saran Jones, oh, okay, can you embody the living TARDIS, please? And then just going and just kicking the ass out of that, because I think that is one of the greatest guest performances of this series, full stop.
Yeah,
I would kind of put it in there. I'd put it in that S tier.
And it's the degree of difficulty, kind of like with Saran Jones, the degree of difficulty that you're throwing at Millie Gibson. You have to portray different ages and different moods, and the feeling of communicating potential depression, alienation, abandonment. Like, this is fucking tough. This is a really tough thing to ask of any actor. To ask it of someone who was just at the legal drinking age is... Russell did take a gamble, and God, he rolled 2 6s. I'm still staggered. I'm struggling to find the superlatives for this. I just don't want people to sleep on what they've witnessed, and I don't want people to think this is normal. This isn't normal. You know, I kind of feel like when Usain Bolt broke the world record for the first time at the 2008 Olympics, we basically danced over the line, and you're just like, what did I just see? That's how I feel about the performance. What did I just see? I still don't understand what special place. I mean, the timeline when she doesn't get this role fits this episode. I don't want to think about that timeline, because Millie Gibson, she's so fucking good at this. Millie Gibson, she's incredible. Millie Gibson, she is celestial.
The thing is, though, I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. So I watched a video about these two lads sort of saying, okay, so which TARDIS team would make it, which other TARDIS teams would make it through the events of Boom? And I'm just thinking, like, what other companion, like, in terms of, like, acting and, like, pulling it off, do you think would have done a better job than Millie Gibson did? And I'm struggling to maybe Catherine Tate, and maybe that's it. And that's not a slander on any of the other actors that we've had so far, but I'm struggling to think who were clearer, and I don't think it would be many.
I never thought I'd see a companion that could potentially displace Sarah Jane at the top. I still don't think we've actually found it, 'cause I don't think she'll be here for long enough. But the fact that I'm even saying that out loud...
I mean, potentially she's going on the Mount Rushmore with Sarah Jane and Donna, but for me.
We are just lucky. We're the lucky ones who get to see her. Yeah, I'm struggling to find the words. That's how good. She has rendered me almost speechless. Final thing before we leave, Ken, you already briefly mentioned it, but you have a book out.
I do. The Companions of Doctor Who. I edited or co-edited the book with Dave Bushman. It's from the same publisher of the World of Demons, the Villains of Doctor Who, that you and I were in together, from Fayetteville Mafia Press. Yeah. And, of course, L.I. Who is coming up. The Long Island Doctor Who convention's coming up in August. And Colin Baker is our doctor, along with Nicola Bryant and Mark Strickson and Fraser Hines. And the list goes on and on. I have over a dozen guests coming for our little late August soiree.
So two things to potentially spend money on. But yes, if you have any thoughts on all what we've spoken about here, you can send your thoughts to analysingdoc2@gmail.com. That's analysing spelt with an S. And we also can be reached on Instagram and Twitter at analysingdw. So Emma, Ken, thank you for both being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And we'll be back next week to analyse Dot and Bubble. Until next time. Our logo is courtesy of Scott Mattison. His work can be found at planetrisecreative.com and on Twitter at planetrise. Our theme tune is by Mike Mould. We can be reached at analysingdoctorwho@gmail.com and on Twitter at analysingdw.